Hello and welcome. Welcome to episode 42. This episode we're talking about accountability. Chris, why don't you get us started?
All right, so this is Galatians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. It reads, Dear brothers and sisters, if another believer is overcome by some sin, you who are godly should gently and humbly, help that person back onto the right path, and be careful not to fall into the same temptation yourself. Share each other's burdens, and in this way obey the law of Christ. This is interesting because I think this is essentially talking about accountability, and that's not really a foreign concept to most Christians, I think, who have reached like a certain stage in their faith, for lack of a better word.
Level 7 Christianity.
Yeah, once you've ascended. Like the idea of accountability is pretty...
I'm so sorry.
The idea of accountability is like pretty common, I think, especially people that are dealing with like persistent sins or addictions. But then here, Paul gives like a clear warning of like, make sure you also don't fall into that temptation of sin as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fly flying around us here. But anyways, yeah, accountability is tricky
Yeah.
because it has. I think about it in two ways. Like in theory, right? This idea of accountability, right? Not going through something on your own and like helping someone, right? Like gently and humbly is the adverbs that are used in the passage.
Mm.
But I think in an ideal world that's perfect and that's what needs to happen. And I think that does happen. But then on the flip side of that, I think a lot of times in regular day, messy, sinful Christian life, that's not what happens. And a good friend of ours always says the line of like, accountability is just someone's way to be nosy, right? And for me, that's always been like this kind of thing of like to shy away from this like accountability partnership relationship, which I always jump to the conclusion that are like, oh, is that really like genuine? Is that like constructive? Like, and in some ways I think it is, but I think like it gets weird when you like officially name it, but like that's just not how I process the world. So that's a biased
interesting
opinion.
way to put it, like officially put it. I don't disagree. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like, will you be my accountability partner?
Right.
And it's just like, oh.
And I've like never had that official status for, I guess how you would say it. But like, I had a coworker who like would keep me. She was struggling with like some addictions, like drinking addictions, and she would keep me updated like every time we worked. And I've never struggled with that. Like I've never been like tempted to fall into addictions of like drinking or drugs or anything. But like I can see how if I was a recovered heroin addict or something, and she's coming in talking about how she's struggling with heroin or whatever, I'm like, oh man, that kind of reminds me of how I miss heroin, and like,
oh yeah, for sure.
And her boyfriend was an addict who was like relapsing, and I could see the toll it was taking on her, where like I think the theory was like, oh, we both met in recovery, so that's good. We're both focused on recovering together, but I think you want to be accountable to somebody who's not dealing with the same thing you are, because you might drag them into temptation with you. I don't know. That's one of the things I took away from this verse, at least.
Throwing another story in there as well. That's in a similar vein. I forgot what it was. Some book I read, but it was some guy was talking about the practical ways that he and his friend like kept accountable from their pornography addiction. And they like subscribed to this web blocker, and every time it tried to access said websites or whatever, it will block it, but then it will send an email notification.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, to the other individual. But here's the thing, it also linked it as well, which is very counterintuitive. So then they're like, yeah, we're not going to use this program anymore. But that was an example where like they tried keeping each other accountable, but then in doing so somehow ended up falling back into temptation, like accidentally. It was very odd, but yeah.
I think of an episode of BoJack Horseman, which is a very odd concept. But anyways, the BoJack Horseman, he's a horse man. Anyways, complicated show, quite good, recommend it. But BoJack goes to rehab at some point, and he ends up getting. Oh, there's a spoiler for some later on seasons. Sorry, Sam.
Fine.
But anyways, BoJack goes to rehab, and then eventually gets the rehab instructor. Like accidentally brings him to a bar, and then he ends up getting drunk, and then the rehab instructor like goes off the deep end and those other things, and it's like this very interesting change in the character where it's like you can see like that the instructor is dealing with it because he's like on the rehab center, but as soon as he leaves that situation, and this is true with most addictions, right? I mean, recovery, especially in rehabilitation, is super important to like empty and like go into spaces that are not familiar to get back in old habits. But it's just very interesting. As soon as this rehab instructor enters back into that situation, he's immediately reversed any change that has happened and has just gone back to the exact same person he was before any of this. And I don't remember what happens. I think he just continues. He just goes off the wagon, and he's just the character eventually gets written out of the show. But yeah, it's just like this very interesting idea of how good intentions can be very dangerous, even when they're not meant to be, right? Like actions still end up going awry randomly.
Yeah. It's funny that reminded you of BoJack Horseman, because like I thought of South Park. Like, I don't know what kind of podcast this is.
This is getting weird.
I'm down.
There was like an episode where they took a field trip to this like, it was like some pilgrim museum type of thing, and they had accountability buddies, and you weren't supposed to let go of your buddy's hand, and it was like basically this kid Butters refused to let go of his buddy's hand, and there ended up being like a shooting and like a hostage situation, and the entire time he's like, "I'm not letting go of your hand," and they're like, "We have to get away," and like it was hilarious, and they probably weren't trying to prove any kind of deep point, but it kind of makes me think of like, you're so focused on being accountable and like focusing on this one thing that you're almost like idolizing this sin that you're trying to get rid of, or idolizing the idea of dealing with this sin, and that becomes kind of like too much of a focus.
Interesting. You're shining light on something that doesn't necessarily need light shined on it.
Right, yeah. And like you're focusing so much on it that you're not focusing on like building new habits or like, I don't know, changing other parts of your life.
Yeah. But also to throw another aspect into that too. I think for me, so I previously before this episode, I was like, oh, accountability is BS. And I think to a certain degree, like it's the presentation, it's like the expectations. And I do think when I said it came out of a place of bitterness, because I do think when framed healthily, when framed in a good way, communicated with boundaries and like whatever is explicitly said, I think it can be done. But what I see more often is that people say we're gonna let's use a simple example, like let's say I'm gonna read my Bible every day and you're gonna be my accountability partner, and then what I see, and like it's like, okay, that's like a simple innocuous like goal, but then you guys do it for like a day or two and then you stop talking, or like you decide, you're like, oh crap, I didn't do it, how do I talk to this person, and then they do it, and then again, like it spirals into like this self-deprecating or like this like danger of like, oh, I didn't do it, I didn't, like I'm a failure to
Just
this.
like guilt.
Yeah, and you lose, and I think going back to your South Park reference, you lose focus on what you were doing and developing those habits, and I think that's where a lot of my anger and bitterness comes from, because either I've been on the receiving end or I've been the one who's dealt the lack of accountability, and I still feel that guilt to a certain degree.
I felt that in music school, actually. It's like, oh, I forgot to practice. Well, I never really forgot to practice. But I didn't practice today, or I didn't practice as much as I should. I'm such a failure. And it's like, well, I don't want to go practice because now I'm already behind, and now I'm not practicing more. And like the whole process, the whole thing is just you're beating yourself up instead of like, oh, well, it's not too late to go back and start practicing tomorrow, Yeah. So I think that's kind of along the same vein.
And then putting in another thing too, the idea of the two parties as well. There's a lot of trust when it comes to accountability, right? Like when you frame it, it's like, oh, like I'm gonna entrust this person to like love me, care for me, and not like change their perspective on me. And even the verse that we just read, you who are godly should gently and humbly help that person back onto the right path, and be careful not to fall into the same temptation yourself. I think this is also an opportunity, a platform where a lot of Christians like inadvertently use this to be like, I'm better than you, and like go on like place themselves on a pedestal. Or on the flip side, they say the shaming aspect, right? It's like, you didn't do that. How could you? Like I'm doing it over here, or like you're clearly not trying, and that in itself can put you in a very unhealthy thing. And I think the two key words that I want to fixate on, gently and humbly. And that's where, like I referenced earlier, like I've been on the receiving end. There are days where it's just like the person, good intentions, they want to be, you know, they want me to be, they want to be accountable. They wanted to make sure I was like doing all right in a certain way. But then the way they presented it was just not loving. It was horrifying. And instead of fearing the bigger things at hand, I feared the individual and their reaction. And to a certain extent, it made me not like I didn't like the individual. I was like, look at this person who's trying to tell me what to do when they themselves aren't even doing the same thing that they're trying to tell me not to do. So yeah, I think that the previous statement before this recording, like I think it was loaded with a lot of emotion. I am still salty, and also at myself and other people in regards to accountability.
It's very interesting. You enter into this like guaranteed shame situation. So, right, like shame is a very good motivator. No one's going to argue that. You know, that's how we teach children not to, you know, do certain things, and it has its place. I'm not ragging on shame too much here. But it is very interesting. You immediately enter into this almost like contractual level of shame because, which is like, that's such a, why would you willingly enter into that? But anyways.
We're weird people.
Well, but I mean, also I think a portion of it is we acknowledge how effective it is. So therefore we want the results. So we will endure the shame and the stress and the issues that are caused by it to have the results. Right. But it is very interesting because if you think about it, like when you have accountability partner for a Bible, let's use that example.
Sure.
So we have one example here. Let's say like I don't read that, right? I'm going to feel intense shame. That person is like disapproving of my actions when I have to tell them that, right?
Yeah.
So it is like, it's very interesting because you are like wanting, like, it's just like a weird idea to me conceptually that you would like want that emotion. But I mean, like, I guess it has its purpose and it has its goals. So it's not like that crazy, but it's just like weird conceptually that you would want to enter into a relationship, which like its designated purpose is for both parties to be ashamed of their actions.
It's like a tough line too, because you definitely, there is a certain point where you need somebody to call you out and just be like, what are you doing? You know, but like, if that's what's happening every time where it's like, come on, man, like that's essentially just like a coach. Like that's like what you think of when you think of like a military drill guy or like a really intense coach, like an athletic coach. And like, I mean, if that's the way you're motivated, maybe like, I don't know, maybe if you're a professional badminton player and you're used to getting yelled at,
that,
but like
what?
The toughest sport.
Yeah.
Really.
Hey, a lot of wrist work in there. I was on a team for a little bit.
I love badminton.
So good.
Yeah, let's play badminton.
That's the one sport I think Chris and I would actually be like. Actually, you like volleyball. I don't like volleyball.
But yeah, like maybe that if that's how you're motivated all the time, but like if it was me every day and somebody was just like, come on, man, like, what are you doing? Like, get your act together. Like, I feel like if I hadn't read my Bible in a couple weeks or months and it's like, you know, you're supposed to be better than that. You're in a position where you should be like, you're like influencing people and you should know your Bible and blah, blah, blah. Then like, maybe, yeah. But if somebody was doing that every day, is that really like humble and gentle? You know?
Yeah.
I think that also goes to show you like how I feel like it's so rare to even. Maybe that's also why I just don't like accountability, because I've never been in like an accountability situation where like I felt loved or cared for, but I always felt reprimanded and shamed. Maybe we just don't understand what that looks like.
And not to poke holes in your idea here, but that's my thing, so that's what I'm gonna do. But this idea of we remember the bad relationships opposed to the good ones, right?
Oh, yeah.
So like, I mean, I think of examples where, I mean, I've never been in a quote labeled accountability partnership. And I think that's ridiculous and I probably never will. But I think that if there's people who generally care about you, you don't need an official title of accountability partnership for them to, for you to be accountable to them and them to be accountable to you.
It comes naturally.
Yeah, it comes naturally. Yeah.
And so like, that's the sense that I think that accountability is crucial and is required. And of course, is never executed perfectly. And there's still a level of like, oh, I want to know some juicy gossip or something like that, right? There's like a part of that. But I think a lot of the times we associate the phrase accountability partnership with the negative things, because I think when, this is my thought here, it's not proved by any science or data for that matter. But I think as soon as you put that label on that, it is immediately going to go awry, right?
It's
Because
like forced.
right, and it's
Yeah.
like what level of genuineness and like how are you going to approach that humbly and gently if like you're like this is my duty to make you accountable,
Mhm.
right? I mean, people aren't robots, but yeah,
Yeah. I think you raise a very wonderful point because, like, the word accountability, it's not a contractual thing, right? Like, good friendships, good relationships, accountability comes naturally, like you said. I think that's a huge point that I guess I never really connected for some odd reason. But like, I think about like Scarlett. Like, I'm dating her, but it's not like, yo, you're my accountability partner, blah blah blah, right?
Yeah.
It's more like, oh, like I care about you, and you care about me, and like we will naturally like tend to like each other like problems and struggles, as opposed to saying, oh, did you do this today? Or did you do that today?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like because that's weird, right? Like,
I mean, I don't, yeah, I don't know how I feel about it. It's just like, oh, did you read your Bible? It's like,
yeah.
oh, but yeah,
But yeah, if you're like in that example, if you're dating someone and it's been a while and you're like, are you sure you're really like being godly? Or like, I feel like you're drifting a certain direction that's not good. You know, you're naturally going to say something because like,
right.
probably partially because that's not what attracted you to them in the first place. But like,
yeah,
even in a different kind of relationship, it's like, you know, that's not you, you know,
yeah.
or maybe that is you and it shouldn't be you. I don't know. But
Right.
then that feels mean.
That's
You
another
should be
conversation.
I mean, I think that, and this is not, I'm bashing on accountability partners, but I do think they have their purpose and their place, and I think some people really need them, and I think some people really grow from them.
Mhm.
That is my precursor to I think they're a terrible idea. For me personally, first of all, I'm a person who has a really hard time opening up, and I think that in the end would actually end up being way more detrimental to my own mental health and progress in that struggle than if I was just like being real with somebody.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But that's me, and I'm weird, and you're all entitled to your own thoughts. But
Yeah,
I don't know. Also, don't really like labels, but that's also kind of my thing. So
it's true. You don't like a lot of things.
most things I don't
The
like.
list continues. The list continues.
Yeah. But like, yeah, I get frustrated because like when I screw up, unless I'm totally oblivious, like I generally don't need to be told that I screwed
Yeah.
up. I'm like, man, I'm really screwing up. And then like in a lot of situations, like an accountability partner is just going to tell me what I already know. And I'm just going to be frustrated.
And you don't want to hear that.
Yeah. Cause it's like, I know it's a problem between me and God. Like, and I know I just need to be better, but I also know that I'm a broken sinner. And that's the whole point of the Bible and the gospel and whatnot and why I need salvation. But like,
There was a lot in that sentence.
there was. But like, it's just, I get frustrated and then like, I get defensive even though I'm being told what I know and already admitted to myself, kind of, but maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if you're airing your dirty laundry, you don't want someone to go like, "Hey, you got dirty laundry on the line."
Right.
Weird analogy, but yeah, like you know your own faults, like so you don't really want someone to tell you like, "Hey, you're really bad at that."
Right. Because that's not going to hit me as hard as like if I screwed something up and I didn't realize I was hurting people and someone tells me, I'm like, oh, like, dang, like this is a big realization.
Mhm.
But in this case, it's not a realization so much as like, hey, just a reminder, idiot, you did that wrong.
Right, and I think that in an example of like a caring and loving relationship where someone gently and humbly, I keep going back to those words, like cares for you in that way, I think that you wouldn't take it, you should not take it. I think most of the time you probably will as like an attack, but of like them actually caring about you. If it's like an accountability partner, it's going to be like, clearly you don't have as close a relationship and it feels much more forced and like,
But here's the thing,
Not
right?
the
Like
same.
you say, like, oh, like, oh, I found that sentence so interesting. It's just like, oh, like you wouldn't be as close as
yeah.
you are with an accountability partner. My next question to like whoever is like choosing like some random Joe Schmo in the congregation, yo, you're gonna be my accountability partner. Why don't you know the guy, and why are you like going for accountability with someone that you barely know?
Right.
I feel like that's just a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is like fear of being vulnerable with someone you care about, right? Like you don't want to open up and show people your deepest flaws to someone like you want to impress, right? But if it's someone you're kind of impartial to, maybe this is me being a sociopath, I don't know. But if it's someone you're like, oh, like they're really cool and they're actually a great friend, but like they're not like my world or whatever the youngins say.
90-year-old Tyler.
If they're not your bay.
Was this 2010? I guess that, around that. But like, I think some of the closest relationships, it'll happen naturally because that's just the way it is. But I think there's also a fear of like, oh, I don't want to lose this friendship by showing this like side of me that's a little more hidden. Because of course we all hide stuff, right? So like, I'm trying to think if there's like somebody you like know, but like you're like, I don't want to be like, oh, I don't really care if I'm not friends with you because that's terrible. But like, kind of in that sense of like, oh, if I lose this friendship, it's not completely detrimental.
Interesting. Okay.
But like, that's
Yeah.
just my.
Yeah, I was gonna
but
say
yeah.
that's a very you thing.
Yeah.
Not to like. Yeah.
Oh no,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
very
yeah.
like transactional, and that's how my
Yeah.
mind works. But yes,
Though I guess in that sense, if it's like something super personal and like destructive, and you don't want to share that with the people around you because you don't want to like hurt them or burden them with that, then maybe it is a good idea to talk to just like that guy over there. I don't know.
I mean that's what therapists are, right?
That's
They're
Actually, that's a good point.
that is a very good point.
like not involved third party entity that is designed to help you and give you outside perspective. So hey, I mean, I'm always for get a therapist. They're great. Should probably take my own advice here, Chief.
The only reason I don't have a therapist is money. So
That's true.
That is also a big thing.
Or is that a lie you tell yourself, Chris, because you're afraid of something?
Well,
But-
I can show you my bank account.
Sorry. No, but but yeah, like there's this idea of like, yeah, there's value in that, right? I mean, I think that I would be careful of the average Joe Schmo, but there are people who are trained to do those kinds of things,
Yeah.
and most of them, not all of them, are very good. So there's like accountability has its purpose and its beauty and its ability to do amazing things, but it also has its dangers, right?
Yeah.
Like BoJack.
Right, just like that. I've thought about watching that show. I never have.
That's quite
Maybe I
good.
will.
Highly recommend.
I need to finish it.
Well, this has been our episode about accountability. But yeah, thanks for checking us out. Thanks for listening. You can check out more at our website, the number 3losersinachurch.com, or on Spotify or whatever else we're on. We're on quite a few platforms at this point. But yeah, we'll talk to you guys later.
Bye.